And we are live. Okay. So I don't have the intro sound. So, Patrick,
right,
if you're ready,
will...
whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just start it off. Okay. This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Nate Blyton.
And I'm Sam Merciers.
And this week we're happy to be joined by the 2015 American Composers Forum National Composition Contest winners, William Gardner, Alex Temple, and Nina Young. Thanks for being on the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
So we have 6 people on the show today, which is kind of a big number. So I'm just going to kind of shoot questions off, and I think a good one to start off with would be, I can say, Nina. How did you in fact get to know about this competition? And I mean, were you just kind of looking things up, or was it pointed to you by a teacher or anything?
I mean, there are these websites that I think most composers know about that post all of the listings of everything. So, you have your weekly or monthly filter where you go through these lists and figure out what you're going to apply to. So it's just on my list of things to do. But actually, this particular competition, I've had my eyes on it for quite some time, just like on my radar, because one of my good friends, Taylor Brook, did it with the Mivos Quartet. It was the Jack Quartet, Mivos or Jack, a couple of years back. So I got to talk to him about his experience, and he really enjoyed it.
I think the takeaway is if you win, you get to write a piece for a good ensemble. Like last year was So Percussion. This year is Wild Up, which I can't wait to see what you guys come up with for Wild Up. And a West Coast-based new music ensemble.
Yeah, it's good to see the West Coast ensembles. I don't think we talk about them enough.
No, we're very New York-centric, and it's worth pointing out that Alex, while she did live and work in New York for a while, is a flyover state composer, represents flyover state composers. Having all the panelists did graduate work at Michigan State, so we've been out in the hinterlands as composers.
Yeah, I did my master's at U of M, so nice. I have a couple of Midwest connections. Also, this opera thing that I'm writing takes place all over sort of Chicago and surrounding areas in Indiana and Wisconsin, and it references all these random little towns that I've been to in the Midwest. So it's almost like a protest against New York centrism.
Yes, well, we protest against it sometimes on the show.
If I may say, great story about New York centrism. I just had this piece behind the wallpaper performed by Julia Holter and Spectral Quartet in New York and a couple other places, and one of the previews of it, here's a list of concerts, you might check out this one, referred to me as experimental Brooklyn composer Alex Temple. And I'm just thinking, New York does not know that anything else exists. It's amazing.
Yes.
Even when I did live in New York, I lived in Queens, so that's like the opposite of Brooklyn.
Well,
everyone's moving to Queens now.
It's the place to go.
Yeah.
I didn't live in Long Island City or Astoria. I lived in Middle Village. It was boring.
One of the things we've tried to do on the show over the course of our 100, and this is SoundNotion 198, by the way, is get international composers as much as possible. And this is the very first time, William, that we've had an Australian-born composer, although you're based in the United States now. Otherwise, you would not look nearly as awake as you do right now.
Right. Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, what an honor. I'm still an Australian citizen. I'm definitely not a U.S. citizen, and if I break the law, I'm liable to be deported at any time.
So, have you thought about if you actually you want to make your career and stay in the United States?
I've been thinking about that lately, and my current thinking is that I would like to stick around here for at least a couple more years.
Oh, that's good.
So, yeah, I'm about to graduate in May, and then I think I am going to try to stick around a little longer.
Well, at least until September, where all your pieces will be given their premieres by Wild Up.
True.
Yes. So, just because we've never had, we've had European, and I don't even think we've had an Asian composer on yet, and that's some criticism I've given myself. But
you mean a composer who's living in Asia right now?
Yeah, or originally from somewhere in Asia.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Have we not? Well, anyway, I wonder, William, what is the new music scene like in Australia? Does it seem well supported, and is the support that it gets integrated in with government programs or anything like that?
I would say the scene is very good. It's very well supported, and it's not as populated as in the United States. And it's just like, I'm pretty sure it's a direct function of Australia having roughly 20 million people and the US having 300 million or however many it is. And so and Australia is geographically the same size as the USA, so maybe that starts to give a bit of a picture. What else? I guess and historically we're just a little younger, and yet people talk about cultural factors, about how confident we are in our own cultural prowess, I guess. And a lot of really talented people travel overseas and study. So there's a little bit of a decentralization of the music scene going on. But I think of a lot of really talented Australian musicians, but they're not necessarily living and working in Australia.
So you think there's kind of the sentiment for college students or people in high school looking to go into music that are pretty much like, oh, well, if I really, really want to get into music, I need to go to Europe or the United States to study? I don't like to say so, but maybe there is a little bit that feeling. And it's complicated because there's a lot of really wonderful things about the way education is done in Australia, I have to say. That the government support is very strong compared to the USA, but we don't have the kind of sort of ridiculous private education institutions that occur elsewhere in the world. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So my education was mostly free in Australia.
That's cool.
Awesome. Well, since we have so many guests, we're going to have to do a little bit of what do you
Round
think?
robin.
And now what do you think? And now what do you think?
Yeah.
So I was inspired by Charlie Rose. I actually listened to a podcast the other day about asking good questions, and Charlie Rose, if you know who that is, was one of the people they referenced. So my question, and I guess I'll just start with you, William, since we've been talking to you, is when did you decide you were a composer? I'm assuming you didn't start in as a, when you started your first initial music education, it was as a composer. So at what point did you decide that's what you were?
I think I sort of decided around the age of 17. That I wasn't totally confident in it at that point, but that's when I started really feeling like a composer. And then I went off and did some other things, and then now I really do consider myself a composer. I sort of had 2 stages to that process. Yeah.
It's interesting that it seems like a lot of people don't have that realization until they're already in college. So what about you, Alex? At what point did you decide, yes, I am in fact a composer?
I don't necessarily think of myself as a composer, quote unquote, these days. I mean, obviously that's the field I'm working in, but so much of my work has theatrical elements or narrative elements, and I write all my own texts. And I wind up feeling like, I'm some kind of artist who happens to have a background in composition, so that's the medium I work in, but it's sort of incidental. I definitely feel more like a composer than a performer, which has not always been true. I used to perform more, but I think I've always been more comfortable composing than performing. So it really depends what you mean by that question.
Well, I think that's a great answer. And I mention this on the show quite frequently that composers are used to, basically programming something and then getting feedback, and you have total control over the sound you get. And it's gotten easier and easier with technology to exhibit the same kind of control over lots of different media, not just music. So why wouldn't you want to do that? So Nina, how about you? At what point did you decide, yes, this is in fact what I'm about?
I think I knew I wanted to do music for sure since about the age of 16, but I was actually on a route to be an engineer. And sometime around the age of 20, when I was doing my bachelor's, I decided that, maybe I would like to be a composer one day. And I think that I only started feeling comfortable enough to refer to myself as a composer probably midway through my master's when I was 25. You know, and there was still quite a bit of doubt as to whether or not, you know, I was deserving of this title, whatever that means.
Certainly.
Earned your composer badge.
Well, see, that using the Charlie Rose model, that's good because I got 3 completely different answers. So,
Good.
Nice work.
But you don't have the black backdrop that Charlie always has.
Right. So, Nina, you mentioned this. I was reading all your bios this morning, and it's interesting that you did your undergraduate at MIT, and you have a degree in, I didn't actually look, music of some sort, but also ocean engineering.
Yeah. I started out as a mechanical engineer and thought that the courses were too broad and wanted to specialize in something a little bit more. So then I went down the path of ocean engineering, which also has lots of subdivisions. So I was doing mostly ship design, propellers, that sort of thing. So there was a lot of acoustic study actually involved in that. And it was great.
Do you feel like that the study you did at that point in your life informs you as a composer now?
I think actually, in terms of technique, taking the idea of building and creating something from an engineering standpoint, certainly. And I do a lot of work with technology and computer music, so the skills that I acquired during my education and in terms of any kind of electrical engineering or programming certainly actually still play quite a bit of a role in the work I do.
Interesting.
I was unsure of the relationship early on, and now I can see that it had quite a bit of impact.
Certainly.
We'll be waiting for that sonar piece from you.
Oh no, everybody wants the ocean piece.
Yes. It's interesting when to think about the different skill sets that composers have, and how that may or may not inform their life as a composer. Like, I also fix clarinets and saxophones, which it's, you know, a very sort of dirt floor engineering kind of thing, you know. And I'm actually working on a piece right now that very self-consciously tries to embrace the fact that I work on these instruments. So I'm writing a piece for alto sax and clarinet and trying to incorporate my understanding of them in somehow, and it's not easy. So I was wondering, Alex, is there some other field? You're already said that you don't consider yourself just a composer, so like, is there another field that you have a strong specialty in, that you have good technique in, or that you study that you think really informs you as a composer?
Well, maybe not super formally. I have spent a lot of time sort of being interested in various things having to do with language. I've been interested in linguistics since high school. I've taken a number of classes having to do with either philosophy of language or critical theory. Actually, when I was at Michigan, so most people who get a master's in composition at Michigan get an MM, but I got an MA, which means that I had to take a few classes outside of music in something that was a minor, essentially. And I wound up taking 2 philosophy classes, deciding I didn't want to do that anymore, taking a sociology of gender class and convincing them to let me declare my minor to be like conceptual frameworks or something like that. So that's been a sort of a running thing, things having to do with language and perception and you know, how people understand the world through categories. And I think you can see that in my work for sure. I mean, I see it in my work anyway.
Well, certainly. I think that's you know, we have composers on all the time, obviously, and some consider themselves an insular being. Like, I go to my quiet place and I'm deep in thought and I compose. Composer as something that is reaching out and engaging with culture in every way that it can all the time. It's interesting to see the different perspectives. William, I'm going to ask you a leading question because you have written music for early music ensembles, and your parents, according to your bio, are big into early music.
Big into it. Yeah.
Yes. So, and I've met some early music people, and as a general rule, they're big into it if they're into it. So how has this informed you as a composer?
Okay. So this I can't really prove even to myself, but I really think that it had a massive role in shaping just how I hear sounds and so forth. So I just grew up from a really early age they're really into it. So at home, it was all recordings were just always playing, and there's a lot of music that I know the sound of that I don't even know the name of from that era and so forth. So I just that sort of just taught me music at a really early stage.
Were you listening to a lot of the like Harnoncourt recordings and things?
Things like that, yeah. Ton Koopman, Jordi Savall, things like that. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because during your formative years, if you, for instance, if I imagine a 10-year-old who is listening to music actively for the first time in their life and like really getting into it, and that music is Gesualdo, as an example, that's way, 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 way weirder than a lot of other options.
Right.
And would really expand the ears of a young person. For a young person to hear that and think, okay, that's normal. Music that sounds that way is normal. That is an interesting sort of alchemy going on in the musician brain.
I actually, if
Go ahead.
I can jump in here, I had a similar experience because I remember I got a CD player when I was 11, and I'd had some tapes prior to that, but I wasn't like listening to a lot of stuff. The first CD I owned was the soundtrack to 32 short films about Glenn Gould. So Schoenberg, Piano Suite, Gigue, one of the movements from Opus 19, a movement from a Prokofiev piano sonata, a movement from a Hindemith piano sonata, Scriabin, all this, I mean, and like tons of Bach too, obviously, but like all this like early to mid 20th century stuff was pretty formative.
Yeah.
And I remember the way I thought about the Schoenberg in particular, I was like, well, they sound like the wrong notes, but they're the right wrong notes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We actually had a discussion last week. We posted our interview with Alan Pearson, but the week before that we had help me out, Michael
Gordon.
Yeah, Michael Gordon on. And we had a discussion about how Baroque music, or at least lots of Baroque music, and minimalism are very similar, how they rhythmically crank up the engine and go, and it's just the tonal context is different in each piece, in each kind of sort of idea. Go ahead, Patrick.
No, I was just going to say, like we were talking about, growing up with a certain kind of music. I don't know. I think people have talked about this before. It would be great to, like, not in a bad way or like this wouldn't be at all negative in any way, but like if you could have like your kid and only like bring them up with some weird music in Western culture, and then like later on introduce them to the first Beethoven or Bach or whatever it might be. Like, what would the oral capacity of that person be, and like how would they hear that the old music? Would it be like completely strange?
We had the discussion.
If only we could just experiment with people like this.
Yeah. We need someone to donate their baby to SoundNotion so we can listen to nothing but 12-tone music and see what effect that has on them when they're 20.
Or like nothing but like death metal.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people that listen to nothing but death metal.
Like,
already.
this death metal ballad is so lovely.
10 probably.
Well, that actually leads into another question. I have a strong interest in you guys represent a younger set of composers than we say typically have on the show. You're still students, but only in the most tenuous sense. You're all getting ready to launch from your terminal degrees out into the world. So I'm expecting the answer that you give me to this will be different than a lot of the other people we talk to. I have a very strong interest in pop music, and pop music broadly defined, because there's not really a much better term to use for it, but like very artsy pop music. What kind of music in that vein do you like, and how does it inform your composition, if at all? And the reason I think it's important because most people, including composers, even composers with a capital C, listen to lots of pop music. And, it invades your life all the time. And to think that it can't inform you in some way, to me, seems unbelievable. So I'll put it out there and see who wants to answer first. Pop music. Go ahead.
I don't even feel like the distinction means very much to me, particularly because for me, when I was like 17, 18, something like that, right around when I started college, I also got Napster, and I also discovered a whole bunch of experimental rock bands who are blurring these lines anyway, and who, if you ask them their influences, will name, they'll name Frank Zappa. They'll also name Bartok, and so bands like Thinking Plague, Art Bears, U-Totem, Henry Cow. I mean, they're called Henry Cow. I mean, there you go, right? And actually, I saw an interview with their keyboardist and saying, "What are your influences?" And he said, Zappa, Coltrane, Soft Machine, Bartok, Schoenberg, and Mission.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of thing. Also like Mr. Bungle and like sort of weirder end of 90s indie rock, Olivia Tremor Control. I'm just naming stuff now. But point being, I've spent so much time. That was like practically all I listened to back then. I sort of stopped listening to anything. I mean, I guess I was listening to some like new music stuff, but I sort of stopped listening for a while to stuff from before the 20th century, and then I started again. But I just like having listened to so much of that stuff. I feel like the trying to make a firm line between, quote unquote pop music and quote unquote contemporary classical music seems very artificial to me.
Sure.
Well, it's certainly getting closer and closer. I mean, there was a need. I think people felt a need to distinguish when it was first happening because they're like, oh, what's this blending? No.
So I'm curious, William, about growing up in Australia. I mean, the arrogant American in me assumes that everybody all over the world listens to American pop music, and that's all. And I'm assuming that a lot of American pop music does get played there. But what was that like for you growing up? And if you listened, did your parents let you listen to anything other than early music?
Okay. Yeah. So it was not. It was a little bit frowned upon, but if you know how adolescence works, that means so imagine you just haven't heard anything but early music till the age of 12, and then finally you get your hands on like your first rock music CD, and you're kind of not meant to listen to it. It meant it had a huge like impact on me the other way. So I started playing the drum kit in school and played in rock bands with my friends and jazz bands and everything. So I had a huge like counter movement within myself towards the pop and rock side of things. So yeah, we get a lot of American pop music. I mean, it comes from America, and jazz comes from America as well. So, but there's a lot of Australian pop and rock musicians. My younger brother being one of them. Yeah.
We'll give the SoundNotion bump to his band.
Yes.
Make sure we get the name and the link.
Yeah.
Nina, how about you? Do you have do you obsess over any pop music?
Yeah, I think my response would be very similar to Alex's in the sense that I don't really negotiate a difference necessarily when I'm listening to saying, oh, I'm going to listen to pop music now, unless I'm listening to top 40. But I would say like there's a lot of like really complex, interesting, popular music out there. And for me, certainly a lot of progressive and indie rock when I was a teenager had a big influence on me, as did a lot of like the electronic bands like Eamon Tobin, Aphex Twin, Autechre. And I think that's really informed a lot of my work, especially because a lot of the way I try to write my instrumental music is informed through like studio production techniques, and nobody does that better than the pop music producers. Right. So if you sit around and you really start to listen inside of these works, you just have this wealth of electronic orchestration that's kind of like will blow your mind when you start paying attention to it. And I'm actually teaching a class right now at Columbia, Intro to Digital Music, and that's sort of the basis of what we do is we listen to music starting from like the avant-garde experimental to like today's top 40 and just try to pick apart the different layers and see like where the magic is psychologically happening.
Right.
And I think like as 21st century composers engaging with all of this is very interesting, and it's culturally informative and can really expand our sonic palettes.
It's so interesting to get these answers because we've had people who very much poo-poo on the idea that their compositional brain is informed by pop music in any way. I think the newer generation of composers coming up now, it's a good thing that we are getting rid of that bias. And so since we've established that's the case, I wonder, and now this is sort of like a what's your favorite color question, so feel free to give a nuanced and multifaceted answer. But who would you consider to be one of or your most influential composer that you got into? And let's start with Nina.
I would say that overall the most important composer to me is probably Ligeti. In that I'm really fascinated by how he simultaneously has these really large forms that are perceivable to like even my mom. So a casual listener who's not educated in like 20th century composition or art music can follow along with these kind of gestalt things that are going on and really get a good experience. And then for the more educated listener, there's so much micromanagement that's happening inside. So I think, yeah, at a general level, I'd say Ligeti was probably the breakthrough composer for me. And then I have to give a little like hats off to my primary and first teacher at MIT, Kirill Makin. He's had a huge impact on me with the way that he listens to sound, and that certainly has shaped me as a composer.
Okay. What about, I think Alex's answer is going to be interesting. How about you, Alex?
Well, I mean, I can't really pick just one, but somebody who comes to mind is Robert Ashley, who has had a huge influence on how I think about vocal music, use of the voice, text setting, and all this sort of thing, because I tend to be pretty frustrated by the ways that a lot of contemporary composers working in, you know, new music, whatever you want to call it, in this thing that we're in, how they deal with text and the voice. I hear a lot of pieces where I feel like the text setting is responding on a very sort of word by word or sentence by sentence level to the text rather than capturing the entire larger affective or affectual meaning of it. I also don't understand why everybody just always wants to set poetry and not some other kind of text. And in particular, why people want to set incredibly dense experimental poetry that you need to read 5 times to even know what it's talking about. If you only get to hear it once, and there's a bunch of musical stuff going on, and you have, constant changes in character and register, and the words are stretched out or fragmented. I mean, maybe the goal is not to make the poem comprehensible, but in that case, I don't really see the purpose of setting it.
These are what the program books are for.
Yeah, right? So, okay, I'll read the program notes and not go to the concert. Then I'll get to experience the poem. Anyway, though, I also have a lot of issues with the way that, traditional vocal pedagogy tells people with singing the English language. And this is something Robert Ashley talks about a lot. The classical vocal technique is designed to deal with European languages that don't have as many diphthongs as we do. And so what winds up happening is that when people using that technique try to sing English, they wind up distorting the way the language actually sounds. So, let's say the word is birds. Somebody coming from a traditional classical background is going to say birds. And yeah, it's fine if you're from Australia and actually don't pronounce the R, but if you're an American speaker who's and you have a rhotic dialect, and that's part of how you speak, why are you altering it? And or I can't think of other examples right now, but basically the way I feel, and again, this is certainly influenced by Robert Ashley's writings about this topic, is that people don't have respect for the language they speak when they try to Europeanize American English in order to sing. And I love the actual, coming at this from somebody who's as somebody who's interested in linguistics, I love the actual sounds that people naturally make when they speak.
Sure.
And so Ashley's work is all about trying to find a way to make quote unquote opera more like actual speech, more like American English, since his operas are all about the American landscape and well, not only that, but California, the desert, the Midwest, and so on. And he writes all his own texts, which I think not a lot of people do, and I think is discouraged sometimes.
Sure.
I don't think it should be discouraged.
Well, I think when you come across an opera composer, and the music and libretto by Dominic Argento, it's like, oh, someone's a big deal here, writing their own libretto.
Yeah, it's like writing and directing your own kind of thing.
Right. Whereas for me, and I think for Robert Ashley
really
too.
Gonna be that good?
Yeah.
That's
for
like,
me, often it's the first thing that I come up with is the story or the text, and the music comes later. And it's really that there's a story I want to tell, and I think that seems to be true with his operas as well.
I'm actually having an instance with a student right now where he's a vocalist and he's working on something where he's writing his own text, and we came up with the text first, and he's thinking about what to do with it, and his approach was very like Europeanizing, and when I read it, I'm like, this is slam poetry. That's exactly what this sounds like. The pacing and the cadence points of this sounds like slam poetry. So I've had to convince him that that's what he's actually writing, and to treat it that way, and not try to Europeanize it.
Yeah.
So how about you, William?
we already know Williams is Monteverdi.
If I had to say one person who's an actual out and out classical composer rather than a member of a band or something, I guess.
Doesn't have to be a classical composer. It could be a member of a band. Like all the other panelists know what I would say.
Yeah, if it's Johnny Greenwood or something, that'd be cool.
No, it's Radiohead at large.
I agree with you there too.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm gonna say Fausto Ramatelli. I really like.
Ooh, high five.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah.
That's you guys did well. That's a tough one to say. Oh, pick one person, and who was that?
It depends on what phase in your life, and I guess like you discover someone, and then you ride that wave for a few years. Yeah. So Ramatelli happened to me.
I'm actually analyzing an index of metals right now, so
really,
for my comprehensive exams. Yep.
Oh my god. I might ask you to send me that.
Okay, we can talk.
Amazing. Yeah.
So are any of I have a question really quick. I just wanted to know are the works all for the ACEF contest? Are they all in progress right now, or still to be?
Personally, I haven't started mine yet. I'm gonna finish my schoolwork.
Me neither. I have other things.
Confession time.
Okay.
So
it's kind of short notice, for a commission too.
I know. Yeah. Like, I write very slow, and the first thing I thought when I saw the contest winners were announced, and then I read the specifics, I'm like, oh, Lord, I would have to start the minute I got the letter saying you won. I would sit down and start composing if I were going to get a piece ready by September. Yeah. So just to be clear, you guys submit a piece that is like your entry to be considered, and then you get the $2,500 reward, and you get commissioned to write a new piece that will then be played in September.
Yes.
That's more just to make sure the audience knows what's going on here. I have a quick question that I think we're going to get some interesting responses about, and I'm not going to go through the roll call on this one. I'm just going to put it out there. Artists other than musicians who you find very influential.
David Lynch. Massively. All the time.
I think it's not surprising that you mention a filmmaker, and I really think that way a lot too. But I would say Marshall McLuhan for me, because I think a lot about how media strikes people and how it influences them, and what the experience is actually like for them, and how it's different for this person and this person and this person. Anyway, anyone else have something they want to throw out there?
Wes Anderson.
Did you hear the line where Wes Anderson was at the Golden Globes, and they said that, keeping to form, Wes Anderson showed up on a bicycle made of antique tuba parts.
With Bill Murray on the back.
Yeah, exactly.
So you guys, How many of you teach composition students?
Not
Any?
Yeah, I do a little bit.
I have a little bit. I don't currently. I help teach a class right now, but I've taught a few students in the past, but I don't do it very much. Yeah.
Yeah, same. I had a
it's-
couple, and I taught a comp for non-majors class actually, which was fun.
That would be very
I-
interesting, actually.
I teach computer and electronic music mostly to non-majors, and then I have a couple of students every once in a while, but not in the last year.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
So
I
this
could have given that answer. That's what I did too.
Okay.
What'd
So
you
this
say?
is interesting because I've recently went from barely having ever taught composition to teaching composition constantly with lots and lots of students, and have been sort of facing my own inadequacies in that. Always
What age
feeling
group
like
are you teaching?
they're all undergraduate music education majors who just want to take composition lessons because I taught some, and enough word of mouth advertising made it sound like it was cool to do. So now I have a bunch.
Are you taking that
And
class
it's
at
a-
Series? Oh, yeah.
It's nonstop frustration. And this sort of relates to the idea also of new music. I wonder, like, what makes music new these days to you? Like, if the goal of at least my goal in teaching composition is to get them to think about how to make their music new, and I always tell them, don't make it merely beautiful. It's got to be new in some way. And we've exhausted all kinds of different avenues of ways to make the music new. So how is it that we make music new now? I know this is a really tough question to answer.
I think this will lead into our blurred lines discussion.
Yes.
I would say this might be a little bit of a overly romantic or fanciful take on it, but I hope that if you manage to sort of successfully put enough of yourself into it, like your own DNA, it's going to be unique and therefore new.
We've had Ken Ueno on the show twice, and that is definitely what he would say. I mean, he
Right.
very much, very self-consciously and technically tries to embed his own life and life experiences into his composition.
It doesn't have to be literally or narrative or autobiographical, but
Sure.
yeah.
And I think in the same way that like bel canto style singing is more of like an artifact sound, and pop music singing is more like a personalized sound. I think as we go forward in time and distribution of art and cultural things is so easy, it's a natural thing for people to start embedding themselves into their work more than making it apply to this sort of artifact idea of what it should be.
Yeah,
Anyone
I
else?
think there's some danger almost in prescribing that we should only aim to make something, quote, new. I think that might be a bit of in my own eyes, a fault of academia in the last however many years before,
100.
the great time that we're living in. And I think there's this sort of push to, well, if it's new, it's got to be good. And I think there's a fallacy there. And I think it actually all does go back to the idea of individuality of compositional voice. And as long as you are staying true to yourself, and that's a really hard thing to find when you're a student, because you're always trying to compare yourself to your peers or impress your pedagogues and the whatnot, to be able to abandon that and really sit back and decide what is it that you have to say that is unique and compared to everybody else, and have the confidence to do that, and there's where the newness comes, I think, and the uniqueness of music.
Well, I think that's well said, and it works into like perhaps a discussion about the difference between composition as an art and craft and composition as work for hire. Whereas someone might want a specific kind of music. Perhaps like film composers go through this all the time with like demo tracks and things they're supposed to copy. Like, well, how do we reconcile film music and that? Can a film composer stay true to themselves while still saying like, okay, I know they want this like sort of moody minor thing going on here or something like that. Like, is that new, or is it just that person being them?
I think it absolutely can be, and I mean the problem is, of course, I'm thinking about film composers who have pretty successful careers to the point that people know what kind of thing they do and are hiring them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking of David Lynch, Angelo Badalamenti has a very, very distinctive sound, which he, I don't know exactly how he arrived at that point, but when you hear the music he wrote for Lynch's films, it sounds like a Badalamenti score, very distinctively. Or, I don't know, Giovanni Fusco, who wrote music for all those Antonioni films in the 60s. It sounds very much like somebody had an extremely specific vision. But I don't know whether he came up with that when somebody, Antonioni or somebody else asked him, hey, can you give me some kind of sparse, atonal, atmospheric thing here? And then he just kept doing it, or whether that was just what he was doing in the first place and that's why he got hired. So I guess you'd want to look into the history there.
Yeah. I kind of have a pet theory about one of the ways that music can be new is the way that it's shared. Because the one thing that is consistently changed for composers is the way their music is, the way it's written physically, how the notation is produced, how that notation is shared, how the music, the noise itself is generated, whether or not it's recorded, and how it's shared. And that's something I haven't come up with and this is my thesis, but it's an interesting question to me, and I bounce it off my students a lot, hoping that they'll have an epiphany that I can't quite get a hold of. But that certainly, to me, is something that is absolutely new about music, is the way it can be shared and the way people can use it and the speed at which they can make it and use it. So, anyway.
We should run on to the news here.
Let's do it.
As we are at 50 minutes already.
Yes, there is a speculative article about who should be the new music director for the New York Philharmonic.
There have been many speculative articles.
Many speculative. This one is they solicit the opinion of a bunch of different music critics. And speaking of being critical, my one critique, and everybody, all panelists know, my critique of this list is that it only includes one woman.
No, it has Corinna and Vivian.
Oh, does it?
I think I don't know actually. I thought it. I figured it was all the Times critics, and they are the two women.
No. The composers. I mean, the conductors. They suggest.
The conductors that are actually.
Yes.
Okay.
They only include one woman, and they're all. They all look. I don't know the ages of them, but they all look a little bit older, so I think they should go with a younger American woman.
Well, okay. So it's all right. A couple things. So it's Marin Alsop and Susanna Malki. Is that correct?
Marin Alsop is not on the list.
Oh, she's not?
Oh, she's mentioned in the second paragraph.
Oh, okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
I'm just going down and looking at the pictures.
Both fantastic conductors, and both who have a real passion for new music. For me, that's the most important thing in choosing the new music director, is someone who will program adventurously and has a dedication to new music. But as they say in the article, like, if you want all these, I think the way Michael Cooper put it was like, basically, I think the last name of every potential candidate, like, you want like a little bit from each of that person, and that person might not exist. Who has like the real core rep down, no matter what, and also like knows everything about new music, and is a great speaker, and is all this. You can only hope for so much from someone like that. I think what we get from all the critical reception that I've been reading, as it's my job to read, is that it's Esa-Pekka and David Robertson. Basically as like the two leading candidates right now, or what the critics would want, I should say. I don't quite know what's going on at the administration level of the New York Phil, but both would be fantastic choices, and I love David Robertson and Esa-Pekka Selin too. So we'll have to wait and see if it's one of them. But
do the guests have any thoughts on this topic?
Whatever. Play my music. That's all they want.
Yes. I want
Well,
my
I think
brother,
it's important to have a
my
cultural
brother-
advocate.
Yes,
Sure.
absolutely. And that's one of the sad part is that Gilbert has been pretty good for new music in the New York Philharmonic, and I hope they don't backstep with whoever they get next. Even if it is an American woman, let's just hope they don't backslide.
It would really be a shame to see the really good things with new music that the New York Phil has been doing go backwards.
Yes.
I would hate to see that because Alan has really been a real advocate for today's culture, today's composers, and I'd hate to see that go away. I don't even know. Even at this point though, I don't know if you could get away with it even because they've been so greatly heralded in the press for doing that.
Well, that's the point, though. Are the donors heralding it? Because they have to care about that more than the press thinks.
Some things are better ticket sellers than other things. But I got to say, like the I don't know, they did what Gruppen at the Armory a couple of years ago. They have performed 2 opera works, or they've done Ligeti and Martigny. All of these like cool like things that they've been doing that are kind of outside of the realm of normal New York Philharmonic stuff has been like really big ticket sellers. The contact concerts
At different venues, though.
At different venues, yeah.
They're always at avant-garde venues.
Yeah. That's true. The Met Museum and well, they don't do a lot of LP Le Poisson Rouge stuff, but yeah, I mean, like when it's an event to speak of, and it's always like the big listing in the New Yorker and the big listing in the Times and things like that, and they sell out. So I don't know if they could get away with not doing it at this point.
Well, on to the actual really important question musically this week that everybody's talking about. The Blurred Lines trial wrapped up
Blurred Lines 2015.
Yeah, wrapped up, and and awarding the family of Marvin Gaye $7.4 million or something along those lines.
Just about.
I'm just putting it out there. I have a very strong opinion, but I want to see what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, I've taken some interest in this. I've noticed my opinion seems to go the other way from what I've noticed a lot of my fellow musician friends are thinking. But anyway, I don't know if you know this about me, but when I was in Australia, I did a law degree before coming here.
Oh.
So I have a bit of a different angle on it, but I don't think we know enough about it yet to be really talking about how the law's changed, because unless you guys know something, I don't think the opinion has been published yet. Is that normally the judgment comes down and they publish the written judgment later?
Well, I don't know about the technical aspects of that, but I have read many articles that say there's been a ruling, and while it's still open for many appeals, the Marvin Gaye estate has been awarded $7.4 million, and I've seen a breakdown of, like, the money, 3-point-something million is for this, and 4-point-something million is for that, and there's actually $9,000 thrown in for some sort of other damages.
Yeah.
But what do you have an opinion about? Is it?
Have you listened to both songs?
Yeah, I've listened to both songs. I mean, I have like zero sympathy for them losing half. It's roughly half the profits from the song. I think it's not gonna really hurt them, and if anything, I'm just kind of.
What do you think about it setting precedent?
See, that's the bit that I don't think we know about yet, because we don't have the judgment. But I think I'm aware that obviously the cowbell rhythm is different and so forth. The harmony is slightly different.
Oh, you know what? That's funny. Because the cowbell. Someone wrote a blog post about cowbell. And it was like they completely broke everything down.
Yeah.
And so since I work for Boozy and Hawks, and since I monitor I see what comes through on like social media, and someone linked to it, and I noticed the cowbell rhythm. They were like, "Oh, so Boozy, what do you think about this?" And then it looks like the cowbell rhythm, and I looked at it, and it's like the exact same thing of clapping music. Like the rhythm is like. Now Boozy doesn't own clapping. That's like one of the Steve Reich works that isn't ours, but I mean, like, it's just so funny that like how much do you take it, like, for one, little.
Yeah. So I think it wasn't any one of the details. I think it was all of them happening together at once. Like, the song was the same tempo. It had a cowbell rhythm that was pretty similar. For me, the upbeat Wurlitzer chords, the offbeat Wurlitzer chords are kind of pretty distinctive. So there's like, I don't know how many elements that were very similar, and then if you take them together and in a really similar context, like this was a pop song that was marketed widely, and this is another one trying to do the exact same thing, then it becomes a taking. And
Well, it's a matter of intent for you.
well, I guess the context into which the song is published, and the intent behind the song can be significant in.
I think that this was the I think it was Pharrell who had said like the big problem with this thing was that before all of this, he's like said Marvin Gaye was an inspiration, and maybe that song was an inspiration or something.
Yeah, I think they did say that. Sorry.
Then if he had kept his mouth shut about that, then maybe they wouldn't have found themselves in this.
It's true, and I think it came down to like little things like that, and I think some people have been saying they're really worried about the precedent that this decision sets, but I don't really think any. I think the only people who should be worrying about it are people who have done something really similar to this, and I don't think it's that scary.
I think it could be scary. I don't know. I don't think that they're similar enough. I don't think that they should have been awarded anything. I think it's ridiculous.
With this one, I don't. I think if we are going to say, okay, this is the point at which someone can rightfully sue, like this is the real deal, then I think that's interesting, because I'm sure there are far more egregious examples of, like, I was just listening to Coldplay Cemeteries of London, which sounds exactly like House of the Rising Sun.
Mm-hmm.
Like the melody is like kind of almost exactly the same, and the chord progression as well, and it like.
And you can't copyright a chord progression. It's worth noting.
Well,
and
certainly,
it's a good thing
certainly
you can't
the melody.
copyright a chord progression, because like entire genre, like all of blues, all of doo-wop, out the window.
There's literally thousands of songs written on the I've Got Rhythm chord changes.
Oh yeah.
So it's
Called changes.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we have to develop an algorithm to see at what rate of similarity are you safe, and then when do you have to sue. And then we can all go into an MIR business and make a lot of money.
Exactly. And to me, like you brought up the blues. Like, if you were going to apply the same logic,
to 12-bar blues or something.
The same logic that was applied in this case, you apply it to blues, you could find hundreds, if not thousands, of songs that would fit the same criteria and would thus justify a lawsuit. And I don't know. Can we think that they were sort of, can we think bad things about them for how much it sounds similar? I think so, but I don't think that the Marvin Gaye estate should have been awarded anything, because they're not the same song.
I think there are plenty of reasons to think bad things about Robin Thicke, but
yeah.
But I would.
The video for Blurred Lines being number one on the list,
and the lyrics. I haven't done a really close comparison of the two songs, but my impression is that they're similar. It sounds like a tribute. It doesn't sound like plagiarism to me, but
they didn't say anything in the, like, I don't believe there's anything in the credits for the song saying, whatever, like, this might be, we give credit to or inspiration from Marvin Gaye. There's like nothing like that.
Yeah, but I mean that happens so often. I mean, I'm thinking about like
surely it does.
It
happens a lot more in public domain works.
It happens in the entire 18th century. I'm just thinking about, I don't know, Strawberry Fire by the Apples in Stereo. Really obviously a tribute to Strawberry Fields Forever, including the title. I mean,
I mean,
maybe they just weren't famous enough to become a target of a lawsuit because they weren't making a bunch of money off it. But you listen to it, it's sort of assumed you're going to know what they're referring to because the thing they're referring to is a very popular song, and it's like, oh hey, they're paying tribute to this thing. That's a thing that happens in the arts.
Yeah.
So you're sure that they didn't credit them in liner or anywhere on the product?
I don't know, actually. I don't know.
But I feel that's where the intent can be kind of significant because there it's kind of parodic in the sense that it's knowingly referring to something else, and that's part of the new work that's happening in the new piece. Whereas with the Blurred Lines versus the Marvin Gaye track, it wasn't parodic at all. It was trying to recreate the same thing for the same purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really significant difference.
Yeah, they also just wanted to make a good pop song and make a lot of money
Right.
with it.
And they're like, how do you make a good pop song? Oh, here's someone who's made a really good pop song. Let me try to do that again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, whenever I've been having Facebook arguments with people about this, I always say, if you want to hear real theft, listen to Danny Elfman's 1989 Batman score, the opening gesture, and then compare that to Matisse Mahler. It is exactly the same. It's even in the same key. That theme is exactly the same rhythm, and it's in the same key.
Right.
That is stealing.
It could be stealing, but maybe the Mahler was in like public domain.
But Mahler is in public domain.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still 100% stealing,
Right.
Mr. Elfman.
Wait, did you say Mahler or Matisse Mahler?
Oh.
Matisse Mahler.
Oh, from
That's probably
Okay.
not in public
Yeah, it's probably
domain.
not
When did he
in
die?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, see, there's a
with
lot of
the
monsters we could be
draconian
having.
with the draconian state of copyright law, which is another conversation about why this is even possible. It's probably still because it's the life of the composer plus what 75 years or 70 years or something. Yeah.
Well,
I have funny things-
So that was
in America, it's different than in Europe and everywhere else in the world. In Europe, it's life plus 70. In Canada, it's life plus 50. United States, I think it's 95 years plus first date of publish. I think.
a ridiculously long amount of time is the answer. Is how long it is.
So should we wrap up?
I think we should wrap up. Thank you so
Right.
much for coming on the show, everybody. We normally feature a pick of the week, which is a work by our composer or performers that we're having on. Since that's not really feasible having the three of you, well, I guess my first question is, what are the plans for audio recordings of the commissioned works once they get performed, or do you know the answer to that question yet?
I don't think we
they're
know the
planning
answer to
that.
Yeah. I think they're planning to record them, but I don't know any more than that. That's what I
All
saw.
right. Well,
I'm sure they'll record. Everybody will
Yeah, there'll be
record
an
something.
archival recording.
Yeah.
yeah, I want to make sure that I'm hoping some recording will be available after the premiere. I don't know. I mean, they're not pop music stars, so I doubt they're going to be very, we want to hold on to this and then turn it into money, Which it would be great if we could turn it into some
bucks.
money. Turn it
Big
into money,
bucks.
yeah. You guys are going to make tens of dollars off of this.
It's gonna be great.
So anyway, my plan, tentatively, barring our ability to get our hands on the recordings, is to at a later point feature them as a pick of the week when we have either a music business person or don't have a guest. After
Maybe
the
for
premiere.
today, you should play pieces by each of us simultaneously.
Well, we can make a whole Williams mix out of it.
We'll cook up a remix right quick.
Yeah, girl talk style mashup. It'll be great.
So anyway, we're very much looking forward to the premieres. Do even though you guys haven't started, do you have an idea of what you're going to write at all yet?
I would like to make it.
Vaguely.
Well,
No.
the group is really cool, and they play. Each member plays multiple instruments typically, and some really weird instruments. So I'm kind of excited to do it. I hope we can do something.
I actually
special
looked.
for that. Yeah.
I was getting ready for the episode, and bear with me, this will take just a second, but according to their website, this are the only instruments you have to choose from. Viola, violin, horn, viola, violin, drum set, percussion, bassoon, electric bassoon, cello, clarinet, melodica, penny whistle, saxophones, sheng slide whistle, bass guitar, laptop, trumpet, English horn, oboe, cello, percussion, piano, bass clarinet, ocarina, bagpipes, flute, penny whistle, piccolo, voice, bass drum, beer bottle, cello, euphonium, trombone, percussion, voice, trumpet, viola, bass voice, trumpet, bass trumpet, trombone, percussion, mandolin, violin, viola, voice, keyboards, and piano. So that's duplicating. They don't
There's
have
not a vocal box. I'm out.
I'm hearing an ocarina solo. I mean, an ocarina concerto. That's what I'm thinking.
With a viola quartet playing along.
Yeah.
I think laptop makes that all like. Oh, okay, laptop, no problem.
Well, they list it, so you guys are free to laptop away.
That's
All right.
awesome.
Well, thanks for
Yeah,
being on the show, guys, and I guess that's gonna do it for this episode of SoundNotion.
I want to chime in before you finish. I wanted to do a quick shout out to Dave McDonald, who normally does this wrap up and normally hosts and stuff. He put it out in the chat. He was like 3 episodes short of doing 200 in a row. So this is the first time he's actually not been on the show.
Oh, Dave,
Wow.
we love you.
Way to drop the ball when we really need you, Dave.
Yeah. So, well, sorry, Dave, you couldn't be with us, but you were here in spirit. To listen to this show, go to soundnotion.tv. You can listen to it streaming there, or visit us on YouTube at I believe it's youtube.com/soundnotiontv, and Facebook, Twitter, all the places. Just search us on Google. You know where to find us. Thanks for everyone for being on the show, and we will see you next week. Okay.
Ocarina concerto. I'm telling you.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. That was really fantastic.